I've never been the kind of person who believes in ghosts, and even now, I still don't know exactly what happened during that trip. What I do know is that I stopped going camping alone after October 2022. I was 31 at the time, living in Pennsylvania and working remotely for a company that handled insurance claims. My job meant I spent most of my week sitting in front of a computer, so whenever I had a few days off, I usually tried to get somewhere quiet. That October, I decided to drive down into western North Carolina. I wasn't looking for anything special. I just wanted a few days away from my apartment, my laptop, and the same four walls. I ended up near the Pisgah National Forest, staying at a small campground about 20 minutes outside a mountain town called Marion. The campground was nothing fancy. There were maybe 15 or 20 sites spread along a narrow road surrounded by trees. Most of the spaces had fire rings, picnic tables, and enough room for a tent and a vehicle. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The weather was perfect. It was around 62 degrees. The sky was clear, and the leaves had started changing colors. There were a few other campers around, but most of them were leaving for the weekend. My campsite was near the end of the road. That was actually one of the reasons I chose it. There was a small wooden picnic table beside the fire ring, and about 20 feet behind it was a steep wooded slope. I pitched my tent, collected some firewood, and spent the evening cooking hamburgers over the fire. Nothing unusual happened. Around 10:30 that night, I put the fire out and got into my tent. I remember hearing a few cars pass through the campground after midnight. Then everything went quiet. I woke up sometime around 2:15 in the morning. I wasn't sure what had woken me. I just remember lying there, inside the sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent. Then I heard something outside, a chair scraping across the ground. It was slow, just a short scrape. Then silence. I assumed it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon had knocked something over. I waited for another sound, but nothing happened. Eventually, I went back to sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside and immediately noticed something strange. The wooden chair I had brought with me was no longer beside the fire ring. It was sitting about 10 feet away, facing my tent. I stood there looking at it for a few seconds. I honestly laughed. I figured I must have moved it the night before and forgotten. I carried it back to the fire ring and didn't think much about it. That afternoon, I drove into Marion for groceries. When I returned around 4 o'clock, the campground was almost empty. I noticed one other vehicle parked several sites away. It was an older dark green SUV. I hadn't seen it the night before. There was nobody around it. I unloaded my groceries and started preparing dinner. Around sunset, I noticed something else. The SUV was gone. I didn't think anything of it. That night, I went to bed around 11. About an hour later, I heard footsteps. They were coming from behind my tent. Slow footsteps. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. I stopped breathing for a second. The footsteps stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I reached for my phone and checked the time. 12:18 a.m. I told myself it was an animal. Then I heard another sound. Someone whispered something. I couldn't make out the words. I stayed completely still. A few seconds later, the footsteps moved away. I didn't sleep much after that. When I finally got out of the tent at sunrise, I found a cigarette butt sitting beside the fire ring. I don't smoke. Neither did any of the people I'd seen at the campground. I looked around for footprints, but the ground was dry and covered with leaves. I considered packing up and leaving. Instead, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. That was probably the biggest mistake I made. That afternoon, I went hiking. I was gone for about 4 hours, When I returned, I noticed my tent zipper was open, not wide open, just about 6 inches. I knew I'd closed it. I always zip my tent completely before leaving because of bugs. I checked inside. Nothing was missing. My wallet was still in my backpack. My laptop was still there. My phone charger was on the floor, exactly where I'd left it. I started thinking maybe I hadn't zipped it properly. Then I noticed something that bothered me. There was dirt on the floor of the tent. Not much, just 2 small, muddy marks near the entrance. They looked like fingerprints. I stared at them for a long time. I didn't touch them. I packed my things and drove into town. I checked into a cheap motel that evening. I told myself I was done camping. The next morning, I called the campground office. The woman who answered sounded surprised when I asked whether anyone had been near my campsite. She said the campground was mostly empty that week. I asked about the dark green SUV. She paused. Then she told me they hadn't had any reservations for that vehicle. That made me uncomfortable. I asked if someone could have driven in without checking in. She said it was possible, but the campground host usually noticed. I didn't mention the footsteps. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. I spent the rest of the day in town. By evening, I felt stupid for being scared. I decided to go back to the campsite the next morning, pack everything, and drive home. Arrived around 8:30 a.m. The campground was completely quiet. My tent was still there. So was my truck. Everything looked normal. Then I saw the chair, the same wooden chair. It was sitting 20 feet behind my campsite, at the edge of the trees, facing the tent. I hadn't left it there. I knew that. I walked over and picked it up. There was fresh mud on one of the legs. I looked toward the woods. Nothing. Just trees. I carried the chair back to my campsite and started packing. That's when I heard a car door slam somewhere farther down the campground. I looked up. The dark green SUV was parked at the entrance. For maybe 3 seconds, I could see someone sitting behind the steering wheel. Then the SUV drove away. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the license plate. The image was blurry. I could only make out part of it. I decided to leave. As I was pulling out, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The chair was back at the edge of the woods. I had just moved it. There was no way I had missed that. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in Marion. I explained what happened. The deputy listened without laughing. That actually made me feel better. He asked whether I'd seen the person clearly. I said no. He asked if anything had been stolen. I said no. He told me that, without evidence of someone entering my tent, there wasn't much they could do. But he did take down the information about the SUV. Then he asked me something that I hadn't thought about. "Did you ever hear a vehicle leave?" I said no. He nodded. He told me the campground had been having problems with trespassers. People occasionally use the area to hunt, camp, or park without paying. He suggested I not go back alone. I thanked him and left. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. About 3 weeks later, I received a message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, just a photo. It showed my campsite. My tent was in the picture. The fire ring was visible, and the wooden chair was sitting beside it. The picture had clearly been taken at night. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then another message appeared. "You left it there." I immediately called the sheriff's office. I showed them the messages. They told me to save everything and not respond. They tried tracing the number, but it was from a prepaid phone. and there wasn't enough information to identify the owner. I changed my number shortly afterward. For months, nothing happened. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Then, almost a year later, I was cleaning out an old storage box. I found the receipt from that campground. I also found the blurry photo I'd taken of the SUV. I zoomed in on the image. The license plate was still impossible to read. But I noticed something in the driver's seat. There was no driver. The driver's side window was open, and behind the SUV, near the trees, I could see someone standing beside the road. I hadn't noticed that person when I took the picture. They were wearing a dark jacket, and they were holding something. At first, I thought it was a flashlight. Then I realized it was the wooden chair. I still have that picture. I've never posted it anywhere. I also never found out who sent me those messages. The deputy I spoke with told me later that they never identified anyone connected to the campground. And to this day, I don't know whether the person had been watching me for hours, days, or longer. What bothers me most isn't the chair. It's the fact that I remember seeing the woods behind my tent every single morning. And I never once noticed that there was a clear path leading from the trees directly to my campsite. I only saw it after I went back through the photos. There was a path. Someone had been using it. And whoever it was had been close enough to my tent to hear me sleeping.